Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Sarah Montague. My guest today is living his dream. He's an internationally acclaimed concert pianist and successful recording artist. But read his account of his life and it resembles a nightmare. When he's away from the piano, James Rhodes is still haunted by the violent sexual abuse he suffered for years from the age of 6. He's written about how it drove him to drink, take drugs, self-harm, and spend time in a psychiatric hospital, and how he was saved by music, only rediscovering in his 30s that he could really play the piano. But in his latest book, he recounts what his successful life really feels like, and it's almost unbearable and distressing to hear. How can he live with the pain of the past? James Rhodes, welcome to Hard Talk.
It's nice to be here, thank you. Quite a dramatic introduction, I have to say.
Well, quite a dramatic book.
Yeah, possibly.
And you intended it to be so?
No, I never intend that. The whole drama thing I've kind of had enough of. Sometimes it can be quite sensationalist to talk about certain topics. And for me, what I really wanted to do is just tell the truth, just be transparent. You know, so much of our lives today seem to entail kind of perfectly curated Instagram selfies and pretending everything's a certain way, and that we somehow have all the rules and we know how to live perfectly well. And actually, I think the reality, certainly for me, and I think for a lot of us, is very different. That actually life is quite challenging and it can be quite messy, and it's okay to kind of admit is the wrong word, but it's okay to say that, to talk about it, to be open about it.
And you have been very open about it in your book. And but the descriptions seem that almost any time that you are away from the piano, on your own, you are almost in a sort of state of constant torment. Is that unfair?
Actually, no, it's probably not unfair. I think when you put it like that, God, I feel more depressed now than when I came in. No, actually, I think it is unfair. I wouldn't say almost any time. There are more and more moments that I feel quite comfortable with my place in the world, but there are a surprisingly large number of moments where I do feel very tormented. But I think the thing is, I don't think I'm alone in that. I really do. I really think that many of us wake up a lot of mornings with that idea of, God, I've had too much to think last night, and I have those voices, that inner critic, the dialogue all the time going on. Today's going to be awful, they're going to discover you're a fraud, the imposter syndrome thing, that you look at yourself in the mirror and you just think, oh God, I'm a disaster, I feel destroyed. And I don't think that's that uncommon. God, I hope it's not just me.
But it is quite extreme with you.
It's extreme with me only because of where it could lead, potentially. Only because of
where you've been in the past.
Exactly, because I have a history of being in various locked psychiatric wards and suicide attempts, and I am, I suppose, understandably nervous about going back there. So when I have a bad day and when things seem to be spiraling out of control, my big fear is that I'm not too long away from ending up back where I was a few years ago. And
you chart in your book about effectively being on tour, and we have we can hear from a concert last year when you were playing Chopin, and this is, I suppose, the day job.
Yes. It's awful watching that. It's like hearing your own voice on an answer machine. And no one watching this will know what an answer machine is, do you? We all have voice now. But do you remember when we were kids and you'd hear your own voice and you'd go, oh God. But
why? What do you think?
The same, probably the same as as you think when you see yourself on TV, or journalists think when they read articles they've written. Not all the time, but it's just slightly uncomfortable sometimes.
But when you were actually playing it, when
that's my happy place. I mean, that's the best point. You know, time just disappears, and I think that's why it's so important to find something that you love, something that is ideally creative. Look, the big problem that I've fallen for too, and I think we all have, we're not designed to live the way we're living in 2018. We're just not built for it. We look outside of ourselves all of the time to try and fix what's happening on the inside, and without sounding too much like Deepak Chopra, it's not working. I don't think it works to get self-esteem from how many retweets we get on Twitter, or how many Facebook friends we like, or if we get the shiny new iPhone before anyone else, we feel better. It's not the point. The point is, I think, to find something, that awful word mindfulness, but the point of it, that we go inside rather than outside. And that's what music does for me. That's what art does for some people, or writing, or photography, or painting.
Okay, but you're talking generally there, as far as you are concerned, what is clear from all that you have written.
It's always music.
Well, it's music that saved you.
Yeah.
But the reason you need saving is because of what happened to you when you were 6.
Yes and no. Personally, yes, but honestly, I mean, look around you. I think we all kind of need saving. We all experience trauma. There's no question about that. For some of us, it's parents getting divorced, or it's poverty, or it's disease, or it's a pet dying, or, you know, maybe further down the scale, there's rape and there's violence, but you can't quantify trauma. That's the point. It's part of the human condition.
And for you, that trauma, it was extreme. It was at the age of 6 when you were very violently raped.
Yes, for a long time, for many years, to the point where, I mean, it ended up with spinal surgeries to try and repair the damage. Physically, the emotional stuff is still there. I mean, obviously, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out if you take a 6-year-old and you do that to him for 4 or 5 years, it's going to result in some pretty severe issues as an adult.
And it was a teacher who did it to you?
Yeah, a gym teacher at school. And it was the 80s, and which isn't an excuse, but nothing happened. Do you want to know something interesting about this country, England, the UK, where we're shooting this, even though it's watched all around the world? And people in other countries, I think they'll hear this and they won't quite believe it, but I promise you it's true. Still today, in 2018, in any clerical setting, such as a school, a teacher today could walk into a classroom and see another teacher raping a 6-year-old girl or boy, and they could shut the door and walk away, and they don't need to say anything. And they won't have broken any laws. That's the point. We do not have mandatory reporting.
For the UK, they do have a duty to report it.
No, they do not. That's the point. We do not. We are one of the only countries in the world that does not have mandatory reporting. And if they do report it to the school or the police, they have no protection, like whistleblower status or anything like that.
Now, you bring that up because did teachers at that school know?
That's a hard question to answer. Yes, is the short answer to that. I was found by a teacher with blood on my face and going down my legs and hysterical, and I mean, as you would be. And I changed overnight, and that was witnessed also by teachers. And one of the teachers, in her police evidence statement, I mean, there's no issue. I have her permission to talk about that because she told me I can, but she went to the head teacher and said, something is happening here and it's not right. And the head teacher said, as they did in the 80s, little Rhodes needs to toughen up, and nothing was done. Nothing was done.
And we should explain that she only came forward after you had done an interview about it in
Exactly.
2009.
Oh, you've done your research, haven't you? Yeah, I did an interview where I mentioned it. It was a big interview in the Sunday Times. It was 2 or 3 pages, and there were a couple of sentences where I said, this happened to me when I was at school. And she got in touch with me, said, I read this interview. I know who it was, and I had my suspicions. I was quite naive, I was quite innocent, I didn't realize it was sexual in nature, but I knew something was happening, and I thought it was physical, not sexual. Of course, it's both. She went to the police, she gave a statement, they tracked the guy down. Here's the thing, sometimes there's a lot of very angry people, I think, in the world, and sometimes that comes out on social media, it comes out, below the articles when people are writing comments, and very occasionally people will say something like, oh, you only talk about this because you want to sell a few albums or you want a bit of sympathy. And I always tell them this story. I talked about this for the first time in 2000 in this interview, and as a direct result of that, the police found this guy. And do you know what he was doing at the time he was arrested? He was old man who was a part-time boxing coach for boys under 10. And so I always, when people accuse me of talking about this to get sympathy or sell albums or tickets or whatever, or books, I say, you know, if I hadn't spoken, this guy would still be doing it. And he could be teaching your grandson, your son, God forbid, your nephew. Would you rather that were happening? So,
how did you feel? Because he actually, there was a police investigation.
Yeah, he was charged. The CPS brought charges. There was a trial date set, and he died before it got to trial. You know, justice turns slowly.
How did you feel about the fact that he, though, knew eventually what he had done to you, the damage?
Nothing. No, there's nothing.
No feeling.
No, I think I mean, I'm. God, it sounds so melodramatic, but no, I'm. That part of me is dead. I mean, there is no feeling there.
We're talking about your teachers and things, but what about your family? Because you say you changed overnight.
Yeah. Again, I mean, I can only really talk about myself. It's like in the book, in the memoir I wrote, Instrumental, where I talk about it. I talk about me because it's my story. It's not my family's story. All I will say is, you know, again, it was the 80s. It was a different time. People were very naive then. I think now, if any of those signs were going on in a kid, we would be all over it. It doesn't mean that it stopped, as we know. It's still an epidemic all around the world. But, you know, people are aware of it more now. We need to talk more about it.
But there was something else. You mentioned your book, Instrumental. It took quite a few years to come out.
This was almost worse than what happened when I was a kid, if you can believe that. But yeah, you're right. I had to get the Supreme Court to give me permission to publish it. It took 18 months, $2 million in legal fees, because they tried to ban the book. Not only did they try and ban the book, but they were after a gagging order that would stop me from speaking or writing in any medium, anywhere in the world, about any aspect of my past.
And we should explain, it was your then ex-wife
Yes.
who was concerned about your son.
Well, ostensibly, yes. Her belief was that I was doing this intentionally to inflict psychological harm on my own child by talking about my own past.
Right.
Which
but eventually
defies belief. But
the Supreme Court ruled.
They intervened, and they changed the law, in effect, to stop this happening again, because the precedent it would have set was so terrifying.
But you talked then, and in a way, when that book came out, about how people are in denial, whether it is your family, the teachers.
Dude, since Instrumental came out, like, I think 2 people in my family, which is quite large, have read the book, no one else. One of them has barely mentioned it, and the only other one who's kind of mentioned it is my mum. It's like it doesn't exist, the culture of silence, which is what allows abuse of any kind to thrive. It's like, we don't talk about this stuff. How could you write a book? You know, the shame, the secrecy, you know, sexual abuse is predicated on shame. It's predicated on the fact that shame will stop you from talking. And that's why I promised myself that if I ever had a microphone, even a small one, I would talk about it. It's not the only thing I talk about. I will talk until I'm blue in the face about Bach, about Chopin, about really lovely things. And the books are a love letter to music. They're a love letter to my son. They're about so many wonderful things. But they're also about this terrible thing that is really, it's one of the big scourges of our society.
But there were, of course, many years when you didn't talk because you moved on from the abuse, you went through school. Tried to. And then it was in your late teens that you started, what was it, drink?
Everything.
Everything.
Not even late teens, well before then, and self-harming and everything else. But you know, the truth is you can't outrun, sadly, you can't outrun these things. It's another reason I talk, is because my own experience, and that of thousands of people who have got in touch with me since the book came out, is that it's talk or die. I mean, I know that sounds very melodramatic, but you have to talk. Not necessarily to your family, not necessarily to your friends, maybe to a good therapist or a doctor or the Samaritans, who are amazing. Or there are organizations you can call, but you have to talk about this stuff. Because otherwise it's like a cancer when it's inside you.
You said that your mother had spoken to you. When she did eventually, what did she say?
Well, she was very supportive and still is, and very loving and very kind. She's a wonderful woman. I think, you know, the thing is that when you have a child, all paedophiles say the same thing, in effect. They all say, you cannot talk about this. If you talk about this, you cannot imagine the horrific things that will rain down on you. You will go to prison, I will go to prison, you will be killed, your family will be killed, whatever it is they use to keep you quiet. And when you're 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, your brain isn't fully wired yet, it's still plastic, that it changes the way you think and you act. And it's almost worse than the physical act itself, because what happens is that every time you're around that person and other people are there, so you have to act normally. You say, yes, sir, or hi, dad, or you shake their hands and you smile. You become complicit in the crime that they've carried out. You become partners. It's like you've robbed the bank together and you're protecting him. And every single time that happens, that bond, even though it sounds crazy, that bond gets stronger and stronger. And so it's no wonder that we have people speaking out now 20 years, 30 years, 40 years later, which is why, you know, things like statutes of limitations on sexual abuse crimes are so ridiculous, because often it can take 30 years before you have the courage, the strength to speak out.
There are many remarkable things about your life, but one is that...
All of our lives, I think. We all have stories.
But in your particular life, which is what we're talking about, you got your life back on a track, effectively.
Yeah.
We had a successful job with a financial publication.
I know, oh my God, I worked in the city. It's the only thing I'm really embarrassed about in the book, is that I worked in finance. I can only apologise for that.
You had a son, and and you stopped the piano because you had...
For 10 years I didn't play, from aged 18 to 28. And I only really started at 14. I only got my first proper teacher at 14. I did everything in reverse. It was like an Amy Winehouse in reverse. Like I did all the drugs, I stopped, and then finally, when I was 28, it's such a cliche, isn't it? I just, you know, life's too short. I quit my job. I said, I'm going to be a concert pianist. Everyone looked at me like I was completely crazy. And you know what? They're not laughing now, because I did it. And to me, that's a wonderful thing, because how many people, I've lost count of the number of people who said to me something like, I know I could write a book, or I always wanted to be an actor. And I think, you know, it's so easy. We get trapped in these jobs that we don't like, marriages that are kind of convenient but just a little bit shabby because we have a mortgage together or we have to pay the bills. And I just think, you know what? You get one shot. I walked away from all of that, and now I'm doing what, ever since I was a little kid, I've always wanted to do, which is play in concert halls around the world.
And you talk about what it means for you that music saved you.
Yeah.
But at that same time, or around that same time, you were having a son growing up.
Yeah.
Who then hit, it was when he hit the same age.
They don't tell you this. I mean, I wish they had. I'm not sure how I would have prepared for it, but I realised afterwards, I found out afterwards that it's very common. If you were raped or abused when you were a child, and you also have a child, when that child turns the age you were when the abuse started, it's very, very likely that your entire world will implode. And that's what happened to me, because I just couldn't, on a biological level, I couldn't do the math. I couldn't see this perfect miracle child who was, you know, 4 years old, 5 years old, this just absolute God-given miracle, and see that, well, I was that size when this was done to me. And and not only that, but the terror of, what have I done? I brought this kid into a world where these awful things happen. I mean, it was shocking.
So what was the effect on you?
Everything fell apart. You know, everything fell apart. I was aggressively self-harming. I was suicidal. I ended up in spending 9 months in various secure wards. I mean, I hasten to add, obviously not because of him. He is still perfect and the greatest thing in my life. And as any father would attest, it's the most overwhelming feeling of love, and it only ever gets bigger. That's also what they don't tell you. Just when you think it can't get any bigger, it gets even bigger. It's amazing, the capacity to love your child. It's everything. But at that time, it brought up a lot of unresolved things, because I tried to run away from it, because I hadn't dealt with it. I don't know how I could have dealt with it, but I hadn't talked about it. Everything just, it's like, you know, when a train stops, but the carriages behind it haven't stopped, and they just crash into the back of it. And that's what happened with me, and it took a long time to deal with that, to recover from it.
A lot to recover from it, but that's in a way, there's one of the messages, if there is one in your book, it is that, look, you don't ever really recover.
Exactly.
It is what it is.
It's a kind of a daily reprieve. That's why I'm so deeply suspicious of self-help books. This idea that you can find happiness in 6 weeks if you do these simple things, or you can suddenly find peace of mind in a year if you follow these little guides. I mean, I think, you know, the pursuit of happiness You know, it's in the Constitution in America, and I don't think we should be pursuing happiness. I don't. I really don't. I think happiness is fleeting. It's a lovely thing when it comes, but we're not designed to be happy, even most of the time, I would say. Just because we're not happy doesn't mean that we're unhappy. There is a giant scale in between of being not happy and being unhappy. And of course, it can go further down into depression and anxiety and everything else. But the message in the book, like you say, if there is one, is that life is kind of messy and imperfect. And I think all of us feel alone in a crowd sometimes. All of us feel slightly like we don't belong. And sometimes just getting out of bed, getting the kids ready for school, getting on the subway to go to work, getting home, putting the kids to bed, eating something and going to sleep is a heroic act. I mean, and no one says, well done. No one says, dude, you made it through the day like an adult. But actually, for a lot of us, it's an extraordinary thing to achieve. When your head is saying all the time, throw yourself under the tube, your life's meaningless, no one will care anyway, life's too difficult, life's too much. Just to survive and endure, I think, is a pretty heroic thing.
And for you, we come back to the music, because
yes, please.
When you had come out of hospital and you were putting your life back together again,
yeah.
It was this combination of writing, talking and playing that saw your career soar.
Yeah, I mean, I had no career before. I'd got out of hospital, I met my manager in a coffee shop purely by chance. And in 2009, I released my first album, which is crazy because concert pianist, you start at 2-3 years old and you're playing 6 hours a day. And here I was, you know, my late 30s, mid-30s. I'm not that old. And I did it all the wrong way around. But you know, music, but that's the thing, it's the one consistent thing. I've been on maybe 35 different kinds of medication. I've seen the same number of psychiatrists and psychologists. I've been in 3 or 4 different hospitals. I've tried so many different things. The only consistent thing that has worked is music.
Do you know how it works?
Well, that's the magic trick, isn't it? I mean, no. I mean, what I do know is when I was 7 and the world was like a goddamn war zone, and I found an old cassette tape with a piece of music by Bach, and I listened to it, and in that moment, everything changed. And I mean, thank God it wasn't a Bible, or we'd be talking about Jesus right now,
well, no,
which is fine. But for me, it was Bach, and it was music,
okay,
and everything changed.
And here you are, this long later, sitting with Bach emblazoned on your T-shirt.
Because, you know...
Let's hear you play him.
Oh, really? Okay, sure. Why not?
Is there an answer to the question of why Bach?
why oxygen? You know, why water? You want to know the really cool thing about that piece, which everyone will know that piece. Everyone watching this program, every single one of you, so long as you have 2 hands, would be able to play that piece of Bach within 6 weeks, even if you've never touched a piano before. I can see that look in your face. You're thinking, no. I mean, I wrote a book, which in a stroke of marketing genius, we decided to call How to Play the Piano. Can you guess what it does? And it shows you how to play that piece. It shows you how to read music, has a copy of the score you put out. You don't need a proper piano. That piano costs, I don't know, £150,000, if you can believe it. You can get a £30 keyboard. You plug it in, you spend 40 minutes a day, every day, some days off. 6 weeks later, you're playing Bach. What a thing. I mean, imagine in an age where everything has an app, where if we can't do it within 3 minutes, we give up, to find 40 minutes a day. It's amazing.
James Rhodes, on that note, thank you very much for coming on Hard Talk.
Thank you.